What happens when a country chooses power over its people? When a democracy becomes a performance and fear becomes policy? This is the story of Forbes Burnham, the tyrant who ruled for 2 decades. And it's also the story of how Hindu identity was tested, targeted, and transformed by exile. Guyana is a small country on the northern coast of South America, bordered by Venezuela, Brazil, and Suriname. But culturally, it's Caribbean. Its population today is mostly made up of 2 major ethnic groups: Afro-Guyanese, descended from African slaves brought by European colonizers, and the Indo-Guyanese, descendants of indentured laborers brought from India between 1838 and 1917. There is a divide between the Afro-Guyanese and the Indo-Guyanese, and it was built into the colony's DNA by the British, who designed their economy around sugar and wanted to keep these 2 populations segregated. The abolition of slavery in the 19th century across the British Empire and other European colonies created a significant demand for labor in plantation economies, and colonial powers instituted the system of indentured labor, which brought hundreds of thousands of Indians to the Caribbean, Mauritius, Fiji, and Africa. I covered this in my last video, which I'll link below. Guyana in particular received approximately 239,000 Indian indentured laborers between 1839 and 1917. And the colonial powers did what they could to keep the Afro-Guyanese separate from the Indo-Guyanese. They separated them in work, in land, and in life. But by the mid-20th century, that separation had hardened into political factions. What forces set these communities on a collision course? In 1950, something revolutionary happened. 2 young leaders emerged: Afro-Guyanese lawyer Forbes Burnham and Indo-Guyanese dentist Dr. Jagan. They joined forces. They formed the People's Progressive Party, PPP, a multiracial, anti-colonial movement calling for independence, socialism, and equality. Now, the PPP won big in 1953, but within months, British troops stormed the colony, suspended the constitution, and removed them from power. They accused them of being Marxists. Without a doubt, this coup fractured the dream of unity. By 1955, Burnham had split from the PPP. In 1957, he formed his own party, the People's National Congress, the PNC, with an increasingly Afro-Guyanese base. From that point forward, Guyanese politics became racial politics. The PPP became the party of the Indian countryside. The PNC ruled the urban Afro-Guyanese elite. As this divide deepened, what did it mean for ordinary families caught in the middle? To the West, one thing mattered: stop communism. And Jagan, a leftist, a Hindu, and an Indo-Guyanese, he terrified Washington. So the US and the UK, they intervened again. They rewrote the electoral system to weaken the Indo-Guyanese vote. And in 1964, Burnham, with less votes but more allies, was handed power. When Guyana gained independence in 1966, he was made prime minister. And from that day forward, Guyana was ruled by one man. Burnham quickly centralized his power, and he declared the PNC paramount and rigged every election that followed. By 1980, he had crowned himself the executive president. And for Indo-Guyanese, especially Hindus, the country no longer felt like home. But the question wasn't just about politics, it was about existence. So how did their daily life change? The Hindu community who lived in Guyana's countryside now faced both cultural erasure and political persecution. Burnham's economic policies, particularly the nationalization of the sugar industry, targeted the backbone of Indo-Guyanese livelihoods. The Guyana state seized control of sugar estates where Hindus worked and worshipped. Their land rights were undermined. Food import bans targeted Indian staples like split peas, what we call dal, and wheat flour. Then came national service, a mandatory training program required for all university students, or for those already enrolled when university became free. It involved 1 year of compulsory paramilitary service, often in remote areas, typically on agricultural projects in the interior of Guyana. These were dense rainforests. Under Burnham's regime, Guyana descended into a system of state-sanctioned terror. The government's grip on power wasn't just political, it was violent. Gangs like the infamous kick-down-the-door bandits, often backed by political forces, launched brutal home invasions targeting Indo-Guyanese businessmen. But this wasn't just lawlessness, it was orchestrated chaos. Anyone who dared dissent, regardless of race, faced public humiliation, job loss, and even death. The assassination of Walter Rodney in 1980 and the murder of Catholic priest Father Bernard Dark made clear resistance could be fatal. For many Hindu Guyanese, the fear was total. It wasn't just political or economic, it was existential.
Growing up, I heard my mother and Nana, maternal grandfather, share stories of why Indians lived in fear. They were afraid of the Afro-Guyanese who would steal and fight to gain power over the Indians. My Nana told me that he used to keep a cutlass at the side of his bed because it was a necessity. He had to be brave and protect his family, and he made a choice every night not to let fear ruin his life. My mother, on the other hand, could not continue to live in fear her entire life. Although she loved everything about the country, she saw the country going down economically and feared for her safety. She left the country shortly after getting married. She has never returned after the events she witnessed as a young child and later as a young adult.
But persecution wasn't the only threat. What happens when a country's economy collapses under the weight of its own divisions? From the 1970s to the early 80s, GDP plummeted. Inflation soared. Infrastructure collapsed. Malnutrition and disease surged. By the mid-1980s, 86% of the country lived in poverty. But Burnham? He remained in power. Through fraud, through fear, and through force. So with their hope fading, what choices did families have? Do they stay and risk everything? Or do they leave the only home they had ever known? Between the late 1960s and the 1980s, over 700,000 Guyanese fled. That's half the country. Many were Hindu. Some had family abroad, some used student visas, others sold their land for one ticket out. The fear of being trapped, politically, economically, and spiritually, it was too much, so they had to leave. But leaving Guyana was just the beginning. How do you rebuild your identity in this new world? In New York and Toronto, new Mandirs were built. Classes on the Ramayana resumed. Phagwa and Diwali were reborn on foreign soil. The Guyanese Hindus didn't just preserve their faith, they globalized it, and they raised generations that still know their mantras, still sing bhajans, and still understands what it means to be Hindu and Guyanese. But the trauma that they endured still remains. It's the pain of exile, the loss of their home, and the unspoken wounds of time when the government treated them like strangers. Leaving Guyana didn't mean leaving behind their Hindu identity though. And in fact, for many Guyanese in the diaspora, exile became a moment of cultural reaffirmation. Across North America, Hindu temples sprang up. Some modest, some were monumental. In Canada, one of the most iconic is the Vishnu Mandir located in Richmond Hill, Ontario. It was founded by dr.doobay, a Guyanese Hindu physician and spiritual leader. He received the Order of Canada in July of 2024. The Guyanese diaspora didn't just preserve Hinduism, they reshaped it. They gave it new roots in foreign soil, not just surviving exile, but thriving within it. Decades later, what remains of this struggle? How do the echoes of the past shape the present for the Guyanese Hindus around the world? Forbes Burnham died in 1985, but the legacy of his rule still echoes in Guyana and far beyond its borders. Across the diaspora, Guyanese families carry stories of what they left behind and why they will never return. These stories are whispered in prayer rooms, shared in the Mandir gatherings that we go to, and passed down over meals. They're stories of loss, yes, but they're also stories of survival, of building anew, of refusing to forget. Because history isn't just what happened, it's what we remember, it's what we carry, and what we choose to teach. Today, Guyana has seen a resurgence in Hinduism through the establishment of temples and schools. I was lucky enough to visit the Sri Krishna Mandir located in Berbice, Guyana in 2007 through the kind invitation of Pandit Rajan Balgobinji. And to be honest, it changed me forever. The Hindu presence is still in Guyana despite the mass exodus of Indians, and today the discovery of oil has also transformed the country, with more and more Guyanese returning to visit. So where do we go from here? Stories from our past need to be told, not to remain as victims, but to strengthen our resolve. The story of Hindus around the world is a story of a history that never gets told. We need to be the change. Thank you once again for watching. If you like what you see, please share this video with your family and friends, and I'll be sure to catch you in the next one. Om Shanti.